Boldwood presents All You Need Is Love, written by Jessica Redland and read by Lucy Brownhill and Gareth Bennett-Ryan. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Jemma, 3 years ago, the 21st of May. Mum! I called up the stairs. Mum! The hearse is here! I cocked my head to one side, listening for her reply. Nothing. What was she doing up there? She told me 40 minutes ago that she was almost ready, and as she isn't one of those women who spends hours teasing one strand of hair into place, there was no reason to disbelieve her. Of all the mornings to take forever, why choose today? Shaking my head, I opened the front door to Mum's cottage, Bear's Pad, before Mr. Golding, the funeral director, had a chance to lift the grizzly bear knocker.
Good morning, Miss Brown.
He gave a reverential bow of his head.
We're ready when you are.
Thank you. We'll be out in 5 minutes. I glanced back towards the stairs. Actually, it could be 10. Do we have time?
10 minutes is no problem.
My throat tightened as I glanced past him to the black limousine parked on the sloped driveway and the hearse parked on the road. It was still hard to take in. This wasn't a day I'd expected to experience for several decades. I tried not to curl my lip up at the orange and yellow floral lettering arrangement resting against the side of the coffin. I hated it, but Logan, my 7-year-old brother, had requested it because his best friend Billy Thomas had apparently told him that people who didn't have one were mean and that the dead would come back to haunt them. I could have throttled Billy Thomas. Logan also wanted a floral teddy bear to thoroughly protect him against any risk of ghosts, but Mum and I had managed to talk him out of that. The deceased would not have been impressed with the bear. He probably would have haunted us for that. Mum! I called again after I'd closed the door. Still no answer. Just a lot of clattering and banging. What's Mum doing? Logan looked up from where he was playing with his Lego on the lounge rug. She's been very noisy. I've no idea, but I'm about to find out. Have you been to the toilet? Not yet. Can you do that while I check on Mum? And make sure you wash your hands. He put down his Lego and pouted. I always do. Logan, what have we discussed about telling fibs? Okay, I promise I'll wash them. You can smell them if you want. I smiled at him. Tempting, but I might pass on that. Logan headed past me and through the kitchen, giggling as he made a big show of sniffing at his hands. Happy that he was doing as asked, I kicked off my stilettos and ran up the stairs. I paused for a moment outside Mum's bedroom, listening to the racket, punctuated with the occasional expletive, then pushed open the door and gasped. Oh my God! What's going on? Mum, why aren't you ready? Wrapped in a fluffy cream towel, Mum turned to face me and blew a wisp of dark hair out of her face. I only bought them on Saturday, she said, as if that explained why half the contents of her drawers were strewn all over the floor. But what on Saturday? Black knickers, an M&S 3-pack. But I can't find them, Jemma. Where did you last have them? She planted her hands on her hips and rolled her eyes at me. Why do people always say that? If I knew the answer, then this wouldn't have happened, would it? She waved her arm across the carnage. The hearse is here, I said, equally unhelpfully. Mum frowned. I thought they weren't due till 10:15. It is 10:15. Well, near enough. She twisted round to look at her bedside clock. Crap! Why didn't you call me sooner? Because you told me you were nearly ready 40 minutes ago, and because I was busy with Logan. Logan? Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, Jemma. Is he ready? Yes. He's downstairs waiting. We need to go in about 7 minutes. Can you manage without the knickers? Her eyes widened. Jemma Bear?
Are you suggesting that I go commando to your father's funeral? I'm not sure that's appropriate.
I laughed loudly. Also not appropriate for a funeral.
I didn't mean go without any knickers. I just meant without the new black ones. Oh, that makes more sense. I suppose I'd better. I can't believe I lost track of time like that. Give me 5 minutes. Hair and makeup are done, it's just clothes I need.
She bent down and plucked a pair of scarlet lacy knickers from the pile on the floor.
Sod it. I'll say goodbye in style.
She paused as she stared at the knickers in her hands.
Do you know what? The last time I wore these was the night Logan was conceived. That was the end of our marriage, and today's the end of everything for him. How apt.
I didn't know what to say to that, so I closed the door behind me and headed downstairs to check that Logan had washed his hands, hopefully without having to sniff them. I'll never forget the day I discovered I was going to have a new brother or sister, because it was the day that Dad packed up his stuff and moved out. I'd recently turned 18, had finished my A-levels and was working in Mum's shop, Bear With Me, before going away to university. It was a surprise to overhear her telling Dad that she was pregnant, and a greater shock to hear that the baby was his, because I'd been aware for a long time that my parents had a marriage in name only. Growing up, I remembered them constantly arguing, but then the argument seemed to stop. Dad moved into the spare room, and they somehow managed to coexist in the same house while living completely separate lives. Dad acted more like a lodger than a husband or father. He spent all his time at work or at the golf club, only venturing home to eat, shower or sleep. Dad had worked in a bank since leaving school, a steady, sensible career. Mum, on the other hand, had an amazingly exciting, jet-setting career. When I was 4, she'd set up a specialist teddy bear shop, Bear With Me, in the North Yorkshire seaside town of Whitsborough Bay where we lived. A genius with a sewing machine, she designed and made a range of jointed teddies called Juicy Bears. Her talent was recognised with a stint as the guest bear artist for some of the leading collectible bear manufacturers. Her Juicy Bears became highly sought after, which took her all over the world to exhibitions and shows. And as if that didn't keep her busy enough, she valued teddy bears for both a local and a national auction house. For years, even the ones before they'd moved into separate bedrooms, my parents had holidayed apart. Dad going away with his golfing buddies, and Mum and I travelling around Europe visiting bear manufacturers and retailers. Dad hated bears. Mum hated golf, and I was pretty certain they hated each other. I'd therefore never understood why they didn't just call it a day. So how had she ended up expecting his baby? What's that phrase? Grief does funny things to you. It certainly did funny things to my parents. My grandma, Mum's mum, had sadly passed away during my exams. It turned out that the dodgy tummy was actually terminal cancer. Grandma had known that her days were numbered, yet she hadn't breathed a word to anyone. Mum had been very close to her, and was devastated that she'd not known how ill she was. A few weeks after the funeral, I was having a sleepover at my best friend Karen's to celebrate the end of college. I'd registered the date too late. Grandma's birthday. Mum refused to let me cancel and insisted she'd be fine. She'd have a glass of wine and toast Grandma, then maybe design a new bear in her honour. Only the glass of wine turned into a full bottle. She was an emotional mess when Dad arrived home from partaking in a few too many at the 19th hole. Surprisingly, it'd been a great comfort. A bit too much of a comfort. The consequences changed everything. Mum had thought that I was in my room when she told him she was pregnant, but I'd been thirsty and was on my way back to the kitchen when I stopped dead on the stairs, my jaw dropping at what I'd just heard. I crouched down and peered through the banister. Mum was on the sofa, but I could only see her legs, not her face. Dad was facing the fireplace, gripping onto the mantelpiece. Even from my hiding place, I could feel the tension emanating from him. He turned round to face Mum.
Are you planning on keeping the baby?
It came across more like an accusation than a question.
Of course.
She sounded surprised that he'd even ask. His fists clenched in his hair.
Despite the fact that we barely have a relationship, let alone a marriage. It's not the baby's fault.
Mum's voice was gentle, which I knew would rattle him even more.
And it's not my fault either.
I could imagine Mum raising her eyebrows at him.
Look, Jules, you can do what the hell you want, but I don't want another baby. Ever.
He pointed an accusing finger at her.
If I was to offer you an ultimatum of me or the baby, we both know what the answer would be, don't we? Which begs the question, why the hell are we still married?
I assume Mum had no answer to that. Or perhaps she simply shrugged, because it went quiet. Then Dad folded his arms, shook his head and said in a much calmer voice,
I guess it's goodbye then. I guess it is.
Scurrying back up the stairs, I sat on my bed and hugged my pillow to my chest while I listened to Dad moving around in the next bedroom, presumably packing the essentials. When the front door slammed, Mum sought me out and told me her news. I feigned surprise, choosing not to add to her pain by telling her that I'd seen his reaction for myself. It must have taken a lot of restraint to speak with empathy as to why Dad had chosen to move on, instead of painting him in his true colours. He came back at the weekend and collected the rest of his belongings. He didn't even say goodbye. Mum put the house on the market and 4 months later, with my university place deferred for a year, the two of us moved to the cottage in Little Samby, a village 10 minutes west of Whitsborough Bay, where we prepared for the arrival of my baby brother. She tried to make excuses for my dad refusing to attend the scans. I hated keeping things from her, so I confessed that I'd overheard the baby conversation, and there was never any need to protect him. I knew exactly who he was, and I wouldn't think badly of her if she ever wanted to vent. Mum hugged me and admitted she should have left Dad years before. I agreed. Why did you stay? I asked. She shrugged.
Habit. Laziness. Too embarrassed to admit I'd made a mistake.
Did you love him?
I thought I did. I quickly realised I didn't, but I was already pregnant with you. He was a good man. He was steady and reliable, and he took charge. I needed those qualities in him back then, but they stifled me as the years progressed. When you meet someone, Jemma, make sure he makes your heart sing and your tummy fizz. I never had that with your dad. Or at least, not after the first few dates.
Life in Little Samby without Dad was like a breath of fresh air. A new hairdo and a fresh style of clothes changed Mum's physical appearance, but her whole personality seemed to change too. She was more relaxed, full of fun and laughter, and constantly singing. Dad had always tried to control me. What I was wearing, who my friends were when I did my homework, and how I should
get a proper job instead of playing with teddies all day like your mum.
I hadn't realised how much he'd tried and succeeded to control Mum too. I don't think she had either. But now he was dead.
Are those hands washed?
I asked Logan, who'd returned to his Lego by the time I got back downstairs.
You want to smell them?
I shook my head.
I'm going to trust you.
Let's get your shoes on. Mum will be down in a few minutes, then we'll be going. Logan picked up his black school shoes, plonked himself down on the sofa, and fumbled with the laces.
Jemma,
he pleaded, exasperation in his voice. I knelt down and fastened them for him.
All done, Logan paws.
He usually smiled at his pet name, but his little face looked very serious when I stood up again.
Jemma?
Yes?
Is today a sad day?
I sat down beside him. Yes, it is.
I don't feel very sad. Billy Thomas said people cry when people die. Should I be crying?
Tears pricked my eyes as I put my arm round him and cuddled him against me. I took a moment to compose myself so he didn't hear any wobble in my voice. Billy Thomas is right. When someone dies, people do often cry because they're sad that they won't see that person again, and they'll miss them.
Oh, I didn't see Daddy much, and I never missed him when he wasn't here. Not like I miss you when you go back to London. Is that why I'm not sad?
Probably. I cuddled him even more tightly against me. For all he tried to control my life and Mum's, Dad had been completely the opposite with Logan. It hadn't just been the baby years he wasn't interested in. He hadn't wanted any of the years with his son. He made a token effort to see him around his birthday or Christmas and gave him a gift that was usually age inappropriate or something he already had. He'd maybe seen him 2 or 3 other times during the year, but only if I was home for the weekend, and he'd spend all the time talking at me and still trying to control me. He'd only acknowledge Logan to tell him to be quiet, stop talking with his mouth full, get his elbows off the table, stop playing with his food. For the first time, I realised that perhaps he had been trying to control Logan too. Logan looked up at me, his eyes big and sad, his voice tentative. "Will Mum be sad if I don't cry?" "Of course not." "Will you cry?" "I don't know." "Are you sad that Daddy's gone to heaven?" I swallowed hard on the lump in my throat. Was I? I didn't want to lie to Logan, but the truth was that Dad and I weren't close. We had been when I was little, but the minute I showed interest in Mum's passion for bears rather than his passion for golf, he seemed to lose interest in me. You'd have thought he'd have been proud of his daughter for securing her first job aged 14, but he'd always resented Mum for the success of Bear with me, so he just rolled his eyes when I told him I had a Saturday job as assistant bearkeeper. Looking down at my brother, I chose my words carefully. It's always sad when someone dies, especially when it's unexpected. Will the drunk man go to prison? I hope so, Logan. A creature of habit, Dad always took a flask of coffee and the Sunday Times to a bench on a quiet country lane, just outside Cranton where he'd settled. He'd been killed instantly when, despite it being late morning, a drunk driver misjudged a bend and ploughed straight into the bench. And Dad. Billy Thomas says that the drunk man wasn't allowed to drive a car. He says he was decol. He wriggled free of my hug. I can't remember the word. I stood up. It's disqualified. Billy Thomas says lots of things, doesn't he? His daddy drives an ambulance. He tried to fix our daddy, but he couldn't. Oh, crikey. I hadn't known that. He said Daddy didn't stand a chance. What does that mean? What had Billy's dad been thinking, having so much to say about the situation in Billy's presence? It means that it was a horrible accident, and Daddy could have done nothing to stop it. He probably didn't even see the car coming and he won't have felt anything. I hoped. An image sprung to mind of Dad seeing the car veering towards him, helpless to move, then I shuddered. I couldn't bear to think about it. The sound of Mum running down the stairs brought me out of the dark place my mind was heading towards. She appeared in the lounge doorway, looking calm, relaxed, and stunning. She didn't look like someone who, minutes earlier, had been wrapped in a towel surrounded by piles of knickers and bras. Her layered shoulder-length dark hair with streaks of red and copper in it was flicked out at the sides and back in her trademark style. She wore a simple black shift dress with cap sleeves and a thin red belt. Pulling on a black fitted jacket, she smiled at us both. Ready? You look amazing, Mum. I couldn't resist a splash of colour. Mum pointed to her belt, then winked and pointed lower. Make that 2 splashes of colour. The church was busier than I expected. Who are all of these people? I whispered to Mum as we took our reserved pew at the front. Work colleagues and golf club members, she whispered back. Either that or they're random strangers who are here for the free vol-au-vents and Pringles. Several of them stood up and gave emotional eulogies. Each one enveloped me with guilt as I realised that I hadn't known my dad at all. It seemed that many of the traits I disliked in him were admired among others. His desire for control had turned the golf club's finances from dire into healthy. His fondness for structure and processes made him a role model at work and meant his branch consistently topped league tables. His calm and quiet demeanour meant he was the person they all confided in during troubled times. Who knew? Certainly not me. And I did cry. I tried to be strong for Logan, but something snapped inside me as I watched the coffin disappear behind the red velvet curtains before being lowered into the crematorium below. My dad was gone. We may not have been close, unlike Mum and I, but I still cared about him. In a funny way, I'd actually miss our awkward, stilted conversations. Over the past few years, he'd finally seemed to accept that he couldn't control my career, and instead feigned interest in my job as curator for the children's section of the Past Lives Museum in London. In return, I feigned interest in the bank or golf, trying to stop my eyes from glazing over as he talked about ISAs, pensions, irons and handicaps. We always avoided talking about Bear with me, and Mum, and Logan. It's amazing how many conversations a person can have about the weather. Logan fell asleep in the car on the way home from the wake. He was completely out of it, so Mum carried him into Bear's pad. "Bailey's," I whispered, removing Logan's shoes as Mum kicked off her heels. "Gosh, yes, a huge one with lots of ice." She carried Logan upstairs while I poured 2 generous measures of Bailey's, then opened the freezer. As I pulled open the drawer that usually contained the ice cube trays, I frowned. What the hell was that? I lifted the packet out of the drawer, brushed a few flakes of ice off it, and stared at the item in my hand, a 3-pack of M&S black knickers.
Chapter 2. Sam. 3 years ago, 21st of May. I sat in my car on Seaview Drive, staring out the windscreen at the waves rolling onto North Bay at the bottom of the cliff. Surfers bobbed on the swell, occasionally catching a wave then wiping out, some in spectacular style, before they hit the beach. Dogs scampered across the sand chasing balls, tugging at pieces of seaweed or leaping into rock pools. The evening was warm, with a gentle breeze. Perfect for a romantic stroll along the beach, followed by a pint outside Blue Savannah, which I assume was Nicole's plan, given that she'd suggested meeting outside the surf shack on North Bay Corner. Running my hand across my freshly shaved chin, I shook my head. Shit. I couldn't do it. I'd told Jack I wasn't ready and the stupid twat hadn't listened. I picked up my mobile and called him. "Don't tell me she hasn't turned up," he said, connecting the call after the first ring. "I don't know, I'm not there." "You can't be stuck in traffic. There isn't any at this time of night." "No, I'm not. But I'm not going. I shouldn't have let you talk me into this." "Sam, you can't just not turn up." "I wasn't going to. I'm not a total git. I want you to call her and tell her I'm not coming." "No can do, bro. I don't have a number." I shook my head. "That's bullshit, Jack, and you know it. I was with you when she texted you with the time and place." He laughed. "Busted. Let me ask you one question. Are you backing out because of Kirsty?" My stomach twisted at the mention of her name. "Yes," I muttered after a pause. "Because, like I said to you when you came up with this stupid blind date idea, it's too soon." "Too soon? Christ, Sam, it's not like she's dead. She's very much alive and still shagging her way around all our colleagues." "Thanks for the reminder." "You're welcome. Look, Sammy, don't call me that. Mum does, and you're not Mum." Jack laughed again. "Okay, Sam. What harm is there in going on one little blind date? One date. One. I'm not asking you to marry Nicole. I'm not asking you to jump into bed with her. Actually, maybe that would be a good plan. If you shag her, you might get Kirsty out of your system. I want to hear all about it, though. Remember, I'm not getting any, so I need to live vicariously through you. I swear that, most of the time, my brother acted about 10 years younger than me instead of 4 years older. His wife, Millie, was 6 months pregnant and had put a ban on sex a couple of months ago, citing vomiting, exhaustion, and a general feeling of ickiness as 3 pretty good reasons for abstinence. It was killing him. And I'm not cancelling your date, he added. You are. I'm not. You are. Bye, Sam. Don't hang up on... But he'd already disconnected. I tried to call him back, but predictably, it went straight to voicemail. Wanker. He knew that there was no way I'd stand anyone up, especially someone who worked at the same hospital as Jack and me. He also knew that I wouldn't be able to meet her, then tell her I wasn't staying in case she thought it was because I'd taken one look at her and didn't like what I saw. Cursing, I started the car and drove down Hernshaw Hill to park in one of the spaces on the seafront. I'd get him back for this. I slammed the car door shut, crossed the road, and slowly made my way towards North Bay Corner. I was already late, but I couldn't seem to make my legs move any faster. Why the hell had Jack brought up Kirsty? He was right, though. It was because of her. I needed more time to get over what she'd done to me, to us. I should have known what to expect, though. She'd been seeing someone else when we met at the hospital's Christmas do. Jack had warned me that the vivacious, beautiful nurse Kirsty Griggs had already worked her way through several of the doctors and consultants in the 2 years she'd been working at Whitsborough Bay General. I didn't listen. I thought I was different. I believed her when she told me she loved me, and that the others had been casual flings until the right man came along. She told me she'd had to kiss a few frogs before she found her prince. Okay, so she'd kissed a whole swamp full of frogs, but who was I to judge? It wasn't like I hadn't had other partners. Just over 2 years we'd been together. 2 exciting, passionate, amazing years. She was feisty and I was stubborn, so we had some horrendous arguments where we shouted and screamed at each other. But the make-up sex was worth the angst. Her many frogs had certainly taught her a thing or two. But it turned out they were still teaching her, and I hadn't a clue. If my meeting hadn't been cancelled that February evening, I might have still been with her, completely oblivious. I don't think that image of opening the lounge door of our rented flat to the sight of my girlfriend on all fours on our new IKEA rug, with one of the junior doctors, will ever leave me. Kirsty, all her crap, and the IKEA rug moved out that evening. My stomach did a somersault as I got closer to the surf shack. Christ, I'd do anything to avoid doing this. I looked at my watch. Bollocks, 15 minutes late. Nice first impression. I scanned left and right as I approached, but I couldn't see anyone waiting on their own. Several couples and groups were seated on the metal chairs outside Blue Savannah, enjoying their tea or a few drinks. But there was no tall lass with dark hair and a nice arse to give Jack's description of her. A dark-haired woman came into view and paused outside the surf shack. She wasn't short, but she certainly wasn't what I'd call tall. Could she be Nicole? A toddler with an ice cream in his hand ran up to her, followed by a man, and the 3 of them disappeared down the steps to the beach. Not Nicole, then. The only other brunette I could see was holding a surfboard, wearing a wetsuit, and standing outside the surf shack chatting to one of the beach lifeguards. Clearly not Nicole either. She'd obviously gone, and I couldn't blame her. I wish bloody Jack had called her when I asked, so she hadn't gone home believing she'd been stood up. Sighing, I leaned against the wall at the top of the steps, looking out towards the twinkling sea. I pulled out my phone to ring Jack. "You're late," came a woman's voice. I spun round and came face to face with the brunette in the wetsuit. "Me?" You are Sam, aren't you? Yes, are you Nicole? She smiled, and her blue eyes twinkled like the sea behind me. Her shoulder-length hair was wet and slicked back, with streaks of sand in it. Her face was tanned with a spattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose and the tops of her cheeks. She was beautiful in a very natural way. Such a contrast to Kirsty, who was always caked in a mountain of makeup. That's right, although I prefer Nikki. 2 Ks, no Y. She wrinkled her nose at me. Do I have seaweed stuck to my face? I realised I was staring and quickly blinked. No, sorry. How did you know it was me? Jack said you were the exact opposite of him in build and colouring, and that you looked like Chris Hemsworth. And I'd have to agree. Are you two really brothers? Unfortunately, yes. He takes after our mum and I look more like our dad. Although I'm liking the comparison to Chris Hemsworth. You can call me Thor if you like. I inwardly cringed at such a crap line, but she threw her head back and laughed a loud belly laugh. Thor it is. Which means I'm going to have to call your brother Loki from now on. He'll hate me for that. Tough. So, Thor, do you surf? No, Thor does not surf, I said, in a caveman-type voice. No idea where that came from. In the films, he speaks with a posh English accent. Ever tried it? No, Thor's hammer gets in the way. She laughed loudly once more, and I found myself laughing with her. That's the first time I've heard it referred to as that. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. Seriously, though, have you ever wanted to try surfing? Well, now's your chance whether you want to or not. I know it's not exactly a typical first date activity, but I figured that if your brother had lied about you and had set me up with a loser, at least I'd spend the evening doing something I love and it wouldn't be completely wasted. No offence. Refreshingly honest, no offence taken. She crossed her arms and cocked her head to one side, staring at me for a moment. I will say, though, that Dr. Jack isn't in my bad books. Yet. First impressions are good. Apart from the incredibly rude late show, of course. Sorry about that. I just, You were going to bottle it. I know. Jack did call me to warn me. He said he was sure that you were too much of a gent to stand me up, but wanted to warn me just in case you went against type. I'm sorry, it wasn't personal. I know. But if you ask me, you're better off without her. He told you about Kirsty? He did, but before you get mad at him, I already knew. I'm afraid it's common knowledge at the hospital. If it makes you feel better, I could tell you that the junior doctor you caught her with was my boyfriend. You're kidding me. She stared at me for a moment, deadly serious. I wish I was. We have a little boy, and we were going to get married, and... She stopped and belly laughed again. Sorry, yes, I am kidding you. Truth is, I don't know the guy, and I don't want to. I do know Kirsty, though. And all I can say is it's her loss. If I'd captured the heart of the ruler of Asgard, I'm not sure I'd let him go. She grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the surf shack. Come on, Thor, let's get you changed into something more practical for the North Sea. If you manage to stand on your board, the drinks are on me. Assuming you don't still want to do a runner, that is. I looked down at our intertwined hands, and at that moment, I knew I'd never want to do a runner. It wasn't just a physical thing. Yes, she was beautiful, but there was something else about her that was captivating. Her sense of humour, her sense of adventure, her sense of knowing who she was and not caring if she wore no makeup and had sand in her hair. Whatever it was, it had me completely hooked. Jack could get things spectacularly wrong, but somehow the boy had done good. Turns out, he wasn't such a tosser after all.
Chapter 3. Jemma, present day, the 24th of June. Scott, sorry I lost you, I said, as the train approached Whitsborough Bay station. Bad signal. Where are you? There was a pause before he said, Still in Manchester. My heart sank. Manchester? No. Why? He'd assured me that his meeting would be finished at lunchtime, giving him loads of time to drive to Whitsborough Bay ready for my birthday meal this evening.
I'm sorry, Jem. I thought we'd have been finished by lunch, but they wanted to discuss a new design.
Didn't you tell them you had plans? I cringed at the whiny tone in my voice.
I know you're disappointed, but what can I do? Refuse to discuss a £500,000 business deal because it's my girlfriend's birthday? I'd have lost my job, and then all the nights and weekends apart would have been for nothing.
He was right. He needed the work. Scott worked for a company that, well, I'm not really sure what they did. He told me when we met, but it had been completely over my head. Something to do with renewable energy and engineering, but that's about as far as my understanding went. His job took him all over the country during the week to meet clients, and had him working most weekends at exhibitions and trade shows to generate interest and hopefully secure some business. As such, time together over the past 17 months had been rare and precious. Scott assured me that it would only be for a couple more years, at which point the company would have expanded. He'd get promoted, and he wouldn't have to travel so much. I know it's not your fault, I assured him. I'm just dying to see you, and I was excited about finally being able to introduce you to Karen. Scott had been home with me twice before, so we'd met Mum and Logan, but Karen had been away for the weekend both times. Every time she'd been down to London to visit me, it seemed to coincide with a weekend that Scott was working, and I hated it that my best friend and my boyfriend had never met. Not even in the virtual world, because Scott refused to engage with social media, saying life was too short to spend it looking at pictures of what people had eaten for lunch.
I'll still get to meet her, he said. I'll probably be there about 9.
I could hear voices in the background and the clinking of mugs.
Sorry, Jemma. Coffee break's over. Have an amazing meal, and I'll be there as soon as I can. I love you only.
I love you always. At Whitsborough Bay station, I spotted Karen immediately. Even if it hadn't been for the large metallic helium balloons in the shape of the number 28, it was impossible to miss the short flared summer dress, adorned with large yellow and turquoise flowers. Living in lycra leggings, t-shirts and trainers for her job as co-owner of Bay Fitness, a boot camp and personal training business she ran with her fiancé Ryan and a friend of theirs, Steph, she tended to favour bold patterns and bright colours when she wasn't working.
Happy birthday!
She squealed. I braced myself for one of her power hugs that can knock you off your feet if you weren't ready for them. Sure enough, she hurled herself at me.
I've missed you. I've missed you too.
The car's outside, and I'm free all afternoon to do whatever you want. What's the plan, Jemma Brown with an E on the end? I laughed at our little saying. We'd become friends when we met at senior school, and united over both having colours for surnames spelt with an E on the end, something which our fellow students and even our teachers seemed to struggle to get their heads round. Back to Mum's so I can get changed, Karen Green with an E on the end. Maybe a drink in the White Horse? Mum and Logan should be home at about 4. We walked towards the car park. Mum had wanted to meet me, but Logan and a few of his classmates had won the regional heats in a school science project, and there was a presentation to which parents were invited. Since Dad died 3 years ago, Mum had gone out of her way to try to be there for Logan at anything like this, trying to make up for him only having one parent. I didn't like to point out that Logan was only used to having one parent around, given Dad's lack of interest when he'd been alive.
I'm looking forward to meeting the elusive Scott, Karen said. I was beginning to think you created a fake boyfriend.
A fake boyfriend? Do people do that?
You'd be amazed. One of my clients told me she wanted to lose weight and get fit for her wedding in 4 months' time. The big day came and went, and when I asked about photos, she started crying and admitted that she didn't have any because she hadn't got married. I felt terrible. Thought she'd been jilted. Turns out she didn't even have a boyfriend. Her sole reason for getting in shape was that she wanted to find one, but she'd been too embarrassed to admit that, so this whole wedding lie just spilled out. No. Karen nodded. I know. It's sad, isn't it? We talked about how she should get into shape for her, and not because she thinks a person she's never met will like her that way. She did meet someone who liked her for being her, lumps and bumps and everything, and they got married last month. I saw the pictures this time. I smiled. Oh, I like a happy ending. Well, Scott is definitely real, and he's definitely coming, but he's stuck in Manchester, so we won't make it until after we've eaten. Bummer. I know. Leah, Tiff and Drew are all still coming up, though. My 3 flatmates had insisted on catching the train up from London to celebrate. They said it was the perfect excuse for a trip to the seaside. Excellent. Any chance that the gorgeous Drew, short for Andrew, has renounced his love of men? I shook my head. Sorry. Drew, short for Andrew, is still very gorgeous and still very gay. And you're still very engaged, are you not? She glanced at her ring. I am, and disgustingly happy with it. A girl just likes to know what her options are, in case a freak wave wipes out her fiancé in the middle of a beach boot camp, and she needs to find a man with an equally amazing six-pack to immediately take his place. We reached Karen's car and loaded my case and the giant balloon into the boot. I still can't believe you pulled a stranger on a tube platform and it turned out to be love, Karen said once she'd pulled out of the car park. That's seriously impressive. It had been a freezing cold evening in mid-January last year when I met Scott. A fierce wind and ice-cold driving rain meant the streets were eerily deserted. I'd been working late at the museum and ran for the tube, but the doors closed a split second before I could reach them. Karen's favourite curse, arse, slipped out, and I laughed as I heard a man's voice say bollocks at the same time. I glanced down the platform to see a tall, dark-haired man in a suit, who'd also missed catching the same tube. Our eyes met and my tummy fizzed. He opened his mouth, but whatever he said was blocked out by an announcement that, due to signalling failure caused by frozen electrics or something like that, our line would be temporarily suspended. And, as there were already problems with 2 other lines too, passengers were advised to make alternative arrangements for their journey. Bollocks, I cursed, as he said, arse, and we both laughed. Were you heading far? He asked, taking a few steps closer to me. We discussed stops, and it turned out that he was staying in a hotel very close to where I lived. Looks like it's going to have to be a cab, I said. I don't suppose you fancy going halves on the fare, assuming you're not a mad axe murderer, that is. He laughed. I'm Scott Hastings, and I only murder people on weekends. Thursdays are my be nice to humanity days, so you're in luck. Unless you were specifically looking for a mad axe murderer, in which case Thursday is close enough to the weekend that I could make an exception. I laughed too. I'm Jemma Brown with an E on the end, and I've got far too much work to do before Saturday to pretend the weekend has already started, so you can keep your axe locked away for now. 15 minutes later, we were both shivering from the cold after 0 success in flagging down a black cab, and no sign of availability on any apps. Scott turned to me with a smile. Jemma Brown with an E on the end. I don't suppose you fancy going halves on dinner instead of a cab. Scrub that. Can I buy you dinner? I didn't even need to think about it. In the short time we'd spent together so far, my stomach hadn't stopped fizzing. My feet and fingers were numb. I couldn't feel my cheeks anymore. But my heart was singing. Scott took my hand and we ran through puddles and rivers of rain to the nearest restaurant so we could dry out and warm up. As I sat opposite him in La Vecchia Scola, shivering and dripping rain from my long dark curls into my wine, I felt so grateful that the tubes had been cancelled, because I suspected that I might have just found love. From Mum. About to leave Logan's school. Are you home? Kiss kiss. To Mum. Hope it went well. Karen and I are in the White Horse. We'll finish our drinks and meet you at home. Kiss kiss. Our timing couldn't have been more perfect. Mum pulled onto the drive of Bear's Pad the moment I'd unlocked the front door. Logan waved frantically from the front passenger seat, and Mum shouted, "Jemma Bear!" out of the window. My heart leapt. I loved my life in London,
but I missed my small family and Karen so much while I was away. London was vibrant and exciting. I adored my flatmates. I had some other great friends there too, and I had an amazing job. But I still thought of Whitsborough Bay and Bear's Pad as home. I couldn't help it. Home is where the heart is, and my heart was with Mum, Logan and Karen. Always had been, always would be. "Jemma Bear!" Logan cried, running round the car to get to me. "Logan, pause!" He grabbed me in a bear hug, singing happy birthday to me. "Are you taller than me now?" I asked, winking at him when we pulled apart. "Everyone's taller than you." "Cheeky." At 5'5", I was the same height as Mum, but it looked as though Logan was going to have Dad's genes. I suspected he'd end up being over 6 feet. "Oi, shift over, Logan," Mum said. "It's my turn. Happy birthday, Jemma Bear." Her eyes glistened as she reached her arms out for me. "I'm so glad you wanted to come home to share it with us. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." We giggled as both Logan and Karen hurled themselves at us for a group hug. "Let's go in and get some presents opened," Mum suggested. Karen cracked open a bottle of wine while Logan changed out of his school uniform. Then we made our way onto the deck. I loved it out the back of Bear's Pad. Located on the outskirts of Little Samby, the cottage was at the end of a quiet street of properties, each one unique in design. Occupying an elevated position and backing onto open fields, Mum's had a stunning sea view. The back garden was surprisingly large, even for a 4-bedroom property. It had been an overgrown mess when we'd moved in, and we cleared it over the years, but when Dad died, Mum was shocked to discover that he'd made provisions in his will for her. More evidence of that caring side that we'd never seen. She paid off the outstanding mortgage, had the kitchen and dining room knocked through and refitted, then had the garden professionally landscaped into terraces. The top terrace was the deck with a large barbecue area, approached through fully folding doors off the new kitchen diner. The next level was a vegetable plot and herb garden, which my green-fingered brother took great pride in maintaining. The next few levels had different types of flower, shrub and water features, and a couple of small seating areas, before reaching a grand paved terrace at the bottom with a patio heater and comfy seating. Along the side of the house, completely private from the road, there was a summer house and a hot tub with a view. "What is your mum doing?" Karen asked when we both made it halfway down our wine with no sign of her. "I'm dying to give you your prezi." "I'll go and find her," Logan said. I stood up. "It's okay, I'll do it." I headed into the house. "Mum?" Silence. "Mum!" Stepping into the hall, I could hear her pacing around upstairs. "Mum? Where are you?" I found her in the bedroom, opening and closing drawers and cupboards, sighing before she shut them. It took me back to the day of Dad's funeral, when she'd been searching for her knickers. Thankfully this time she hadn't emptied everything over the floor. "Are you okay?" She jumped. "You scared me." "Sorry. What are you looking for?" "Your birthday card. I found your presents." She pointed to a selection of colourful gift bags on the bed. "Your card isn't with them, though. It's huge and it's in a bright pink envelope, so it should be easy to spot." "Can I help?" She shook her head. "It could be anywhere. You go downstairs. I'll do one more check in my workshop, then I'll be out. If it's not there, I'll buy you a new one tomorrow." "There's no need." "But it's your birthday." I smiled. "Cards are lovely. And you know I'd be lying if I said I didn't love prezzies. But the most important thing is being with 3 of the 4 people I care most about. Right now, one of them is rummaging in her wardrobes when she should be on the terrace drinking wine with the others." She planted her hands on her hips and pretended to look shocked. "You've given your brother wine?" I laughed. "Make that drinking wine or iron brew." "Phew. 5 minutes, I promise." "What was she doing?" Logan asked when I returned to the terrace. "She couldn't find my birthday card." "Oh." The smile slipped from his face, and he suddenly seemed very interested in his feet. "Logan, What aren't you telling me? It's nothing. He wouldn't raise his eyes. It's clearly something. He shrugged. Mum often forgets where she's put stuff. I laughed. I hate to say it, but it happens to us all. It'll happen to you when you're older. I'm always putting things in a safe place, then forgetting where they are. He shrugged again. She couldn't remember where she put my football boots, but we found them in the oven, and she couldn't find the cauliflower I'd picked for Sunday dinner. It was in the airing cupboard. It stunk. He looked up and I could see how worried he was. The poor lad was 10. He should be worrying about his voice breaking, not whether his mum was losing the plot. Butterflies danced in my stomach as I thought about the knickers in the freezer. I smiled brightly and hoped it looked more genuine than it felt. We all do dippy things when we're busy or tired, and Mum's both at the moment. When the next auction's over, I bet things will go back to normal. Don't worry, Logan. It'll be fine. But even as I said the words, I knew it wouldn't be. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Chapter 4. Jemma.
To Jemma!
Cried Drew later that evening. After our meal, we'd moved on to Minty's, a cosy bar at the top of town. He waved his pint in the air, sloshing beer over his hands.
Hurry up and turn 30 like the rest of us, 'cause you're making me feel old.
Happy birthday, gorgeous girl. Karen, Leah, Tiff and Mum echoed his toast, raising glasses of Prosecco in the air. Logan, Karen's mum, Rachel, and Karen's younger sister, Eden, had joined us for the meal, then said goodnight. Logan was staying with Rachel and Eden overnight, so Mum could stay out for a few drinks. Mum and Rachel were as close as Karen and me, which I loved. When Mum was working away, Logan usually stayed with Auntie Rachel, which he loved because, with only a year between them, he was great friends with Eden. Thank you, I said, toasting them in return. And thanks so much for being here. I was genuinely touched that Leah, Tiff and Drew had travelled north, when we could easily have gone out for a meal in London instead after my birthday. They really were the best. I'd met Leah through work. She was a financial accountant, but volunteered as a tour guide at the museum during weekends. Shortly after Dad died, I'd been leaving the museum with her one Saturday evening, when my landlord rang to tell me that he was selling up and emigrating to New Zealand. I went into full panic mode about where I was going to live, and Leah insisted I accompany her to the pub before rushing into any renting decisions I might regret, especially as her twin sister and their cousin, who she was meeting for a drink, might be able to help with my predicament. The three of them shared a 4-bedroom flat that Drew had inherited from an auntie on the other side of the family. They'd recently said goodbye to their 4th flatmate, an acquaintance of Drew's, who stole their food, smoked in the flat, used all the hot water, refused to do any cleaning, and generally epitomised the most irritating flatmate ever, and were half-heartedly looking for a replacement so they could afford to refit the kitchen. As soon as I met them, it was like being among old friends. They insisted I see the flat before I agreed to move in, but I already knew that I wanted them as flatmates, even if the flat was a bit rough round the edges, and it had been the best decision ever. There was always laughter and banter in our flat, just like there'd always been in Bear's Pad after Dad left and we moved to Little Sandby.
What time's Loverboy finally planning to put in an appearance?
Drew asked. He didn't like Scott, and unfortunately, the feeling was mutual. They'd stared at each other over breakfast the morning after I met Scott. The meal had gone very well before Drew retired to his bedroom with his cereal, not reappearing until Scott had left. I asked him about the strange atmosphere, but he said he couldn't put his finger on what was wrong, other than that he didn't trust Scott. It unnerved me because Drew was usually a good judge of character. But then I'd reminded myself that he thought that my predecessor would make a great flatmate, when clearly he hadn't. I confronted Scott too, but he said he'd only been off with Drew because Drew had been giving him the evils, which was true. I decided to accept it as one of those things, and hope that they tolerate each other, even if they never became friends. Scott will be here at about 9, I said. Play nicely.
I always play nicely. You do not, cried Tiff. You either blank him or you give him the Spanish Inquisition.
Drew pulled a shocked and hurt expression.
Me?
So, how's it going with Dr. Indiana Jones? I asked Tiff and Drew, keen to change the subject. They were nurses at the same hospital, and a new doctor had started there recently whose name really was Dr. Jones. They couldn't resist the Indiana Jones connection, which I suspected the poor guy had been ribbed about ever since he'd qualified. They'd both had a crush on him, but weren't sure whether he was straight or gay. Personally, I think they were more interested in the mystery than the actual man, because they told me on several occasions that they'd never date a doctor.
I nearly spoke to him on Tuesday, Tiff said.
Nearly?
Wow, that's great progress. He spoke to me yesterday, Drew announced, grinning.
Bullshit, Tiff cried, punching him lightly on the arm.
He did?
He said thanks when you picked up the penny dropped.
That's hardly a meaningful conversation.
Drew held his hands up in surrender.
Who mentioned a meaningful conversation? I just said he spoke to me, which is 1,000,000 times better than nearly speaking to him. What's nearly speaking to someone anyway?
I sipped on my Prosecco and laughed as the banter continued. Leah retold the story of a disastrous blind date that one of her accountancy colleagues had arranged for her earlier in the week, with a tax accountant called Ernie, who turned out to be in his 50s. Something the colleague had failed to mention. Karen told us about a couple of elderly gents who proposed to her every time she ran an over-60s fitness class at her local community centre. One of them had offered to feed arsenic to his wife if she said yes, and she suspected he was deadly serious. Then Mum told us about her friendly stalker, a man in his 50s called Terence, who popped into the shop at least once a week, refusing to speak to anyone but Mum, and leaving with his tail between his legs if she wasn't working that day, or was running a bear-making class and couldn't say hello. I looked round at my friends and family, and realised that it was thanks to them that time apart from Scott wasn't nearly as difficult as it could have been. They always cheered me up if I was feeling melancholy.
Is there someone in here celebrating a birthday?
I turned round and jumped up from my chair, nearly upturning it. Scott! He put down the gift bag he was carrying and pulled me into his arms, kissing me until we were blasted with cries of, "Get a room!"
Sorry I couldn't get away earlier. I missed you.
I missed you too.
I love you only.
I love you always. I giggled when Karen started making vomiting noises. Let me introduce you to my very rude friend, Karen. Let's get you a drink, I suggested, once he'd had a chance to say hello to everyone, and Karen had prodded him to check he wasn't an apparition. Are you in the car?
Nope. Already dropped it off at your mum's and got a taxi in.
Thank you. He was so thoughtful. For obvious reasons, I felt very strongly about drinking and driving. For me, it was either drink and don't drive, or drive and don't drink. I didn't care that there was a legal limit because I knew from personal experience that I could have 3 glasses of wine and feel perfectly in control, or have 3 sips and feel tiddly and unsteady. So why risk it? Just abstain. Scott was always supportive about it.
I reckon it's my round as a forfeit for being late, Scott said. What's everyone having?
He disappeared with instructions to get another bottle of Prosecco and a pint for Drew.
So, that was the elusive Scott,
Karen said when I sat down next to her again.
He is real after all.
I can't believe you prodded him to confirm it. That's outrageous. What do you think of him? I knew that Mum and Logan had really taken to him, but it was important to me that he also had Karen's approval.
Marks out of 2? I'd give him 1.
Karen? Cried Mum, as Karen and I creased up at the phrase we'd picked up in our late teens.
Sorry, Julie,
Karen said.
I think he's lovely, Jem. Very gorgeous and obviously completely smitten with you. I approve.
Mum leaned across the table.
I meant to ask you this before. Scott always says he loves you only.
Oh yeah, I noticed that. Karen frowned.
He loves you only amongst his harem of 20?
There's a context, I promise. After we'd been together for a month or so, I decided it was time to properly induct him into the world of teddy bears. So I introduced him to the hug.
The hug?
Tiff asked. It's the term given to a collection of teddy bears, Leah said. Don't you listen to anything we tell you about bears? From the colouring of Tiff's cheeks, she obviously didn't, but that was fine. They weren't everyone's cup of tea. Do continue, Mum prompted. I explained the differences between the fabrics, joints, eyes, etc., and probably bored him senseless. I kept going on about how much I loved different bears. He picked one up and said he loved the expression it had, but what he really loved was me. A chorus of "Aww" went around the table. It was the first time he told me he loved me. I told him I loved him too, but I'd never said that to anyone before, so I got all embarrassed and started saying the names of different bears I also loved. He stopped me and said, "Well, I love you only." It kind of stuck, and because I felt I needed to say something in return, "I love you always" became my thing. Mum nodded. That makes perfect sense now. Karen pointed to the gift bag that Scott had left on the floor. What do you think's in the bag? A bit big for an engagement ring. Engagement? You don't think he'd... She shrugged. Well, I don't know. Coming up to 18 months together. Birthday. Could be the perfect occasion. I looked towards Mum, but she just smiled and looked away. I stared at the sparkly silver bag. No, he wouldn't. As you say, it's too big to be an engagement ring. But now that she'd planted the thought in my mind, it wouldn't go away. I tracked back to recent conversations, trying to find clues in anything he'd said or done, but there was nothing to suggest a proposal was on the cards. I felt stupidly nervous when Scott reappeared. He gave Drew his pint, topped up our glasses with the Prosecco, then raised a toast. To my gorgeous girlfriend, Jemma. Happy 28th birthday. I'm sorry I missed the meal, but I've bought a pretty special gift that will hopefully make up for it. He handed me the gift bag. Happy birthday. I knew what was in there immediately. I'd handled too many bears over the years not to recognise the feel of them, even encased in a bag. The exciting part was what sort he'd have chosen. Old, new, artist. I gently peeled back the sticky tape and peered inside, grinning. What is it? Karen asked. A bear. A real one? Drew asked. Ha ha. I reached my hands into the bag and carefully lifted him out. Oh my God! Scott! He's one of Mum's. Drew frowned and looked at Mum, then me. Scott's given you one of your mum's teddies. Why? Not literally one of Mum's bears. It's a juicy bear. Remember I told you Mum designs them? This is one of her designs. He's absolutely gorgeous, Mum. Thank you so much, Scott. I love him. Checking the table wasn't wet, I sat him down. He was a traditional-looking bear, about 35 centimetres high when seated, wearing a really cute waistcoat, the front of which was made out of small grey and blue patchwork diamonds. What's his name? Karen asked. Mum gave all the bears a name. Karen and I had named several over the years when Mum was stuck for inspiration. I looked at his tag. Diamond! Oh, cute! Is that because of the diamonds on his waistcoat? Partly, Scott said, and partly because of what he's got in his pocket. I caught Karen's eyes across the table and knew that she was thinking about the conversation we just had. My heart raced as I reached my fingers into the pocket of Diamond's waistcoat and lifted out a simple platinum ring with a small square diamond held in place by 4 claws. Scott got down on a bended knee beside my chair as the others gasped. I love you only, Jemma, and I want to marry you. Excuse the pun, but do you think you could bear to spend the rest of your life with me? Could I? Nothing would make me happier. Eyes glistening, I nodded, handed him the ring, and held out my shaky left hand. Is that a yes? He asked. Yes! I squealed. He slipped the ring onto my finger, stood up, and wrapped his arms round me. This time there were no shouts about getting a room. His lips met mine for a warm, tender kiss, and I melted against him. I'd never felt so happy as I did at that moment. I could feel the love emanating from him with every kiss and every touch. Did you know? I asked Mum, after everyone had admired the ring and given hugs. Yes, he asked my permission. Oh, that's so traditional and so sweet. She hugged me once more. I'm so happy for you. You two are just perfect for each other. I gazed across at him, laughing with Tiff and Leah, my heart aglow. I really had found love that day at the tube station. And, unlike Mum and Dad, I'd found someone who still made my tummy fizz and my heart sing nearly 18 months down the line. It was going to be forever.
Chapter 5. Sam. Present day, 24th of June.